Good evening, everyone. On behalf of W4W Foundation, welcome to another session of Friday Waters. The idea of Friday Waters is to wet the Fridays with fun-filled and yet fruitful activities for the future generation. Friday Waters has water talkies, book reading, thesis club, and water arts. The focus of the Water Reading Club is on bringing the authors of the book, novels, comics, etc., made on the water matters to the session in order to discuss with them the making of the book or novel or the comic and the issues around the subject covered, which is basically water. Besides bringing interest in water conversation, this will also increase the outreach of the books, novels and comics in the water networks and in the society at large. My name is Mansee Bal Bhargava, and I shall be talking about a mini book authored with Professor Anthonie van Ast on why resource governance fails and examples from urban lakes in India, which is published by Indrastra Global in 2020. So let me just jump and take you through the intent and content of the book. Can someone please confirm if you are seeing the screen?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So the book, as I mentioned, is part of Indrastra Global's Indrastra papers, written on why resource governance fails, example from urban lakes in India. It's co-authored by Anthonie van Ast, who was actually my supervisor in my PhD at Erasmus University, Rotterdam. So it is basically an extension of my PhD thesis, and I pulled out one chapter of my PhD thesis to really lay out understanding of community better through the established theories and models and arguments. Our editor is Tanushree Indoria in the book, published in June 2020 when I was a professor at Amity University, Raipur, Chhattisgarh. The book is, of course, written in English, but now it is translated into few more languages across Africa and in some parts of Asia. It is a small book, as I mentioned, mini book written in a length of 98 pages. And it's also available in Amazon for very peanut price, but it is also available for free download. The purpose of the book is not to really sell the book, but actually to make it available as a textbook for younger generation to understand things in a simpler manner. So let me just tell you the content. Very small chapters, 21 chapters, including introduction and the last part of discussion. And each of these chapters are actually some of the well-known theories, models, or arguments on governance, which are available. So I've just brought them together through this book. So I will take a few of them in this masterclass today, and take up questions for any of them which are written here as content. So right from bioeconomic equilibrium, the tragedy of the commons, prisoner's dilemma, logic of collective action, free riding, transaction costs, property rights, unpriced resources, externalities, command and control approach, polluter pay principle, going for panacea, economic mismatch, community governance, changing value, addressing change, governance of problems, and governance of sustainability. Then the book ends with a small discussion on why these isolated theoretical models or frameworks and arguments are very important to understand society in a better way. So importantly, when we look at a national resource or a common pool resource or a shared resource, there is often a basic question which is posed: why resources that are expected to generate exceedingly valued function, they fail to provide the expected results? So what are the reasons for it? And often those reasons are characterized by a very common way of looking at it, that this is not done, that is not done. However, over the time, they have been, characterized by some established theories, models, and arguments, which is the very essence of writing this book. As I mentioned, with 5 years of PhD, we came across most of these concepts or theories and models. And it was also realized during working on urban lakes in India that most of them are applicable to most of the lakes. So it's not that this is applicable here and this is not applicable here. So that was also a big learning. And because it took me so much time to understand these heavy concepts, and because my career was going to take a shape more on an academic side, it was kind of an genuine intent with my supervisor to really come together and compile the popularly used theories and highlight on the urban lake side of it, because there is not much written on urban lakes in the country. So each of these are briefly discussed, just to save stress on the brief part, because each one of them can be written as a book by itself. But the idea is to bring them together, and if someone is really keen to understand one of them, they can always get into really learning in detail, because each one of them had been heavily written and referenced by many scholars around the world. So the idea here is to just bring them together in a package, so that if one wants to diagnose further or dive deeper into any one of them, they can go further into referring to other scholars. So this is more of a pocket book, you can say, where you can just get a quick glance and then you can go detailed. And this book does not provide detail, just to put a disclaimer on it. Important aspect to understand here is the notion of governance, which is understood in many ways, particularly in context sense, in structure sense, in process sense, in outcome sense. In this book, it is written more in the input and the process sense, where the outcome is more on the sustainability side. For example, why it failed, which is what is discussed here. So governance failures are often linked to several societal and ecosystem behaviors. The book particularly focuses on the societal behavior. So how a community does or how community does not do anything, or why does community really behave in certain manner, the way they do, resulting in a poor governance or a failed governance towards resource. In this case, I'm using the example of urban lakes. So the guiding research question in the book is, what do we know about why resource governance fails to perform in the case of urban lakes in India? As I mentioned, it is a kind of a spillover work from my own PhD research, and a lot of literature was lying around in the PhD work, which could not be put as part of the PhD manuscript, because these are very well-known theories and models, so they were not required in the PhD. So we decided that we will bring it together and put it in the form of book. That was the whole idea. So first, delineating the governance itself. Sorry. Governance in simple terms means who can do what to whom, on whose authority. So in here, it is important to stress upon the fact that governance in most of the cases in India is often considered or associated with governing by the government. And that's where it requires demystifying that at some point, we need to really have this clear distinction between government and governance. And governance is usually an umbrella term which has been used extensively in other disciplines. For example, policy network, public management, advocacy coalition, coordination of sectors or actors, public-private partnership, or governance, as in governance, which we are discussing, and a very, taking it for granted as governance to be a good governance. So when we talk about governance, it is naturally considered as a good governance. So that is also taken into account when governance has been delineated in the book. As I was mentioning, governance is aspired to be good governance in the discussion and is applied in the context sense, particularly in the administrative capacity for sustainable development or successful development, or in this case, we are talking about lake development. So the idea is applied here in the process as well as outcome sense with a normative reliance that good governance leads to good resource outcome, or smart governance for that matter nowadays, which is also much of a talk. So, so in this case, governance is pretty much a process which is being stressed upon, and the outcome is also governance here, because we are talking about failure of the governance in the book. So the common factor here is basically looking for the coordination and between the actors and sectors, which was previously more inclined towards talking about government done governance or private sector done governance or community governance for that matter, which is talked about in self-organization. So here demystifying it and going beyond the government or private dominant governance and really focusing on where community is at the core of the governance, or community is the integral part of governance, because government or the private sector is made up of people from community or is made up of from individuals from the community. So which means governance is a process of interaction based on accommodation rather than domination by a particular sector. So not even community for that as a dominance, which was a literature in the traditional water governance. So, where it is also considered that governance without government is also not possible. It's naive to think about it, but the role of government has to be, or is more clearer in the governance literature as a key role of facilitator. So this is how governance is basically defined, and based on that other theories and models are looked upon. So I'm now going to get into some of the theories and models, because there are 20 of them and 19 of them, sorry. And I'm going to only discuss few of them, and rest of them I'm going to take it as questions if you have any, and you can take them. So a very well-known model is the bioeconomic equilibrium model written by Gordon, and it was written in the context of fisheries, where the idea was that highly valued functions are over-harvested in the absence of effective rules and regulations, which can limit entry or exit from the resource appropriation or use. The underlying model in this is basically having a presumption that all that one needs to do is to regulate the resource use or regulate the resource itself by imposing formal rules where users have some kind of incentive to use or to basically find optimal solutions for overuse of resources in terms of charges, fees, levy, taxes, fines, or something like that. So this is a kind of a foundation for most of the common pool resource understanding in appropriation or over appropriation for that matter. If I link with the urban lake situation in the country, looking particularly in last 100 years, we see that this whole notion of community management of lakes have over the years slowly shifted to government as a provider. So both government is even thinking that they are the provider of services of the lake functions, and even society or the community thinks that it is the duty of the government to take care of the lakes. This is a major shift in last 100 years in the way lakes are managed in the country. And this is because of the fact that they were over appropriated in the process of urbanization. Lakes were over appropriated. Just to give an understanding how one can read bioeconomic equilibrium. Coming to the most referred article in the world when we talk about resource governance is The Tragedy of the Commons, written by Dennis Hardins. Even till date, it's the most referenced one. So if you are studying water governance or commons governance or any natural resource governance or common pool resource governance, this becomes like a Bible document to read. And interestingly, this has been also contested. So even if it is the most referenced, so even if you want to contest, you have to refer it. So as simple as that. Hardin came up with the idea of open access or no ownership situation, where he talks about pasture land or grazing land, where he says it is neither owned by the government nor owned by the private sector, where it becomes a no man land and people have really no incentive or no clue how much they are using or how much they should be using to make it optimal between the community or between each other. So people tend to overuse the resource. So Hardin uses pasture land and cattle to show this as an example. If you have X area of the cattle farmland and there are 2 cattle, so vis-a-vis there are 20 cattle, or vis-a-vis there are 200 cattle, what happens in that area. Of course, over-harvesting happens and it comes to deterioration, to complete halt. Just like Gordon, Hardin also was a strong proponent, which is the model which, even if we look at today's governance of the resources, is used. So Hardin and Gordon's model become the fundamental of the way we are managing our resource even till date. Like Gordon, Hardin was also very big proponent of regulating the resource. So resource should be either privatized in order to realize the advantage or efficient use from its efficient market exchange, or basically optimizing its use and getting a reward in return. Or resource should be centralized by the government for a long-term understanding where government can ensure equitable, efficient, or effective use of the resource and provide it to the masses. So this was his advocacy, which laid the foundation of governance by the government in the last 100 years around the world. And not only scholars, it was actually more influencing to policymakers, to practitioners, to consultants who agreed upon this idea in a situation of failing to govern the resources. As I mentioned, it has been heavily contested. For example, in my own PhD research, and later on, I also contested the very fact that there is no piece of land in this world which is not owned by either government or the private sector, or by anyone else. Community for that matter. So if this situation ideally does not arise of no ownership or open access, it may be unattended, but it is not really a no ownership situation on this earth. So first of all, the assumption that this kind of situation arises becomes wrong. Similarly, Alina Rostom herself talked about it extensively and contested the theory that people are really communicating, people are informed about who is behaving in what manner, and accordingly, there are adjustments in the society. So anyway, we are discussing more how these theories are used in urban lakes. So just to give you an example, how tragedy of the commons is also overtly relied upon in studying urban lakes, because if you look at urban lake situation in the country, within 70 to 60 years and 100 years, we have lost many, more than half of the lakes are lost. The existing lakes are half by size. So if we are talking about diminishing value or diminishing size or diminishing number of the lakes, this theory stands very true. So we can say that in the past, from many lakes for few people or a lesser population, today we stand in a situation where we have few lakes for more population. So if we look at urban lakes over 100 years, so then we cannot deny that the tragedy of the commons really happened in case of urban lakes. Another well-known and established theory, which is also very extensively used, is prisoner's dilemma, where we all are trapped into. And I'm going to give very simple examples over it. But before that, what is prisoner's dilemma? It's a non-cooperative game, because we are living in society where we are observing who is doing what, and accordingly, I may steer my behavior towards a society or towards a resource in this case. So in prisoner's dilemma situation, individuals have dominant strategy, basically to defect, because we are more reactive towards situation after observing others, and there is this loss of trust factor also which plays in the game. So basically individuals have then lesser incentive to really behave well towards the resources, or when all of them are looking into each other's behavior, we actually arrive to a worst possible outcome, not only for ourselves, but also for the society at large. And pollution of lake is a classic example, where everyone's house dump is going into the lakes, and everyone is thinking that it's not my waste, I did not pollute it, someone else did it, government is not doing it, and my polluting will not really hamper the lake. Just to give a very simple example, so in both situations we are in a trap. So why should I clean the lake because others are not doing it, and I am not polluting the lake, others are polluting the lake? Just to understand in simple way that we are really trying to stay in that dilemma because A, we don't want to change our behavior probably, or we would like others to change their behavior before we change our behavior. So this is a paradox or challenge which we are all trapped into, despite the fact we are considered as rationally behaving individuals. We are not collectively able to produce rational outcomes, or we are producing irrational outcomes, despite the fact that all of us are rationally behaving individuals. But we are in that trap, and that trap is prisoner's dilemma. So as I mentioned already, we are then less motivated to do something because others are not doing. And at the same time, we are in a situation that, oh, I am not polluting, others are polluting. In case of urban lakes, you all can relate with across the country what's happening. Now, this is a very optimistic theory, unlike the previous classic models, which are very well referred. This is Logic of Collective Action by Olson, and he argues that when there are lesser number of people, they can come together in a group and they can basically, with some coercion or some catalytic thing, they can actually change their behavior for common interest. So if people can come together, for example, in the traditional time, village community used to come together and decide about the appropriation of the pond water for irrigation, for domestic purpose, for animals, and and to the extent of even punishing people, to the extent of how much water to be used, how much water to be saved for the entire year, all these things were worked upon. So what Olson talks about is that it is possible for people, rationally behaving people, to come together and work towards collective good, collective outcome, when they know each one of them is going to benefit out of it. So this is where, you can say you can avoid the prisoner's dilemma, you can avoid the tragedy of the commons if this logic can be worked out. Now, this logic does not work in urban lake situation. Because when we talk about a small group in a village community, we are already talking about homogeneity. People can talk to each other, people know each other, people are sitting together once in a while and talking about the good things and how to manage the community itself, where water management is one of the aspects. But what happens in urban areas, this cannot happen without any catalytic movement of coercion, as Olson puts it. And the reason being, if I'm not talking to my neighbor, how can I go together with the neighbor and do something together, or there are people who know each other and who are friends for good, but not really friends for need. So this is a very common problem in a heterogeneous society where it is extremely difficult to come together and work for a cause, and which is what is happening in most of the urban lakes. Now, what is the coercion which we are seeing in urban lake situation? The coercion then becomes any policy incentive, any funding incentive, any project incentive where different organizations, where communities come together because it has been facilitated. And that's why governance by government or governance by some coercion becomes a very different ballgame as compared to self-governance. So in urban lakes, we did see in the last 20 years in India that projects like National Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, JNNURM, National Lake Conservation Plan, first time lake conservation policies and guidelines were written in the country in the early 2000s. Then these were very successful in bringing together all the stakeholders on one platform, including sharing of responsibility by the private sector, community participation. So the coercion was important for that collective action, even if people were not directly motivated, but the coercion helped, coercion through funding, coercion through, compulsory law by the national authority that the local authorities were forced to do something. So what I'm going to do here is now, because there are 19, I cannot really go through each one of them one by one, but I can take questions from other things later on. I will quickly go to the last few of them and then close my speech, and then I can take questions. So as you see, I have just listed 4 from the first part, and then I will share the last 4 from the book. Okay. So an important phenomena or argument is the changing value of resource. with the evolution of the society, and that is an extremely challenging for governance to handle, because the changing value also attributes to the polycentric nature and also attributes to the changing role of the organizations or changing role of the community towards the research. So the thing is, in governance, as I mentioned, de facto considered as a good governance, and at the same time, it is also a normative assumption that good governance will lead to good, in this case, lakes, for example, or towards sustainability. It is really challenged to meet the societal demands from time to time, whereas the demand itself is changing, which is the changing value. So governance also has to evolve itself from time to time, because communities' perception, communities' preference from the resource extraction or the value of the resource is changing. So then governance also has to change its mechanism to govern, to provide those values which is expected by the society. So values, as we know, can be measured through goods and services at a time and place. But if it is not captured by the governance, the changing value, then governance is really facing that problem. So how does governance really update itself with the changing value? Because many a times the governance approach itself is changing the resource value. And for example, lakes in the past were more used for domestic and irrigation purposes. Large lakes suddenly after industrial revolution and dam revolution and agricultural revolution had a completely different role to play for energy. Then over the time, we also see that with canals, with dams, with all kinds of engineered water system, lake itself became an engineered water system, where its role from agriculture, irrigation to domestic changed completely as a technical and engineered system. And now in the recent time, we see most of the lake development are happening for recreation, where nobody is talking about ecosystem, nobody is talking about its use for domestic purpose. So this change of value also requires change in the governance system, which is really a challenge in today's time. Another important aspect in change in value is that in the past, water body had a more value than the land itself. But today in urban areas, we see that a lake which has no water for some time of the year is seen as a precious land, which can be appropriated more with a higher monetary value as compared to the lake. So lake seen as a piece of land itself changed the value of the lake. Even today, when we talk about the monetary price of a lake, often the price is ascribed by the land in which the water body is there. And when for some time the land has no water, it has been already been in the eyes of many, or developers for that matter, even local authorities, to declare it as a piece of land and allocate it for development. So there is a saying which I often say in my lectures, a lake lost is a land gained. So that's a changed value already, the value is transformed. And this is not really captured by governance of water bodies. So, and it's a challenge, then it's a failure, you know. So addressing the change, why it is a challenge for governance to really address this many kinds of changes. So because in this book, we focus only on the social changes or behavioral changes, we need to also understand there are ecological changes also happening in the water systems, or in any resource system for that matter. And governance has to actually capture those changes. And how does it capture those changes? Because if we are continuously working on a very stereotyped, which I am not really discussing today, that governance is also trapped in the panacea approach. If that was successful there, it is also going to be successful here, which is not the case in governance, because governance is very tailor-made approach for every natural resource. So governance has to really look at both social changes or ecological changes. For example, a social change, urbanization itself is a major social change over the time. When we talk about homogeneity to heterogeneity, when we are talking about ecological change, we see now when we talk about lake, it is more about dealing with the water pollution, dealing with the soil pollution. There is still not much talk about lake ecosystem, because the focus is more on providing the social aspect of the lake than the ecological aspect of the lake. So we are catering to lake development for recreation rather than catering to lake development for conservation or ecosystem rejuvenation. this is a kind of a conflict or struggle with the governance, what to address. And that also will be discussed more on governance of sustainability. So another important challenge which governance faces or fails to do, because society expects in the governance process that they are informed, they should be informed by somebody, in this case, which is the government, about the emerging crisis of the resource. So if the groundwater depletion is happening, if flooding is happening, if water epidemics are happening, it has to be pre-informed for society to react to it. Society does not really want to do it by itself, or they do not have mechanism to do it. So somewhere governance has to be updated itself so that it is constantly informing the society about it. Very good example is disaster management arrangement which we have. But because lakes are very small entities and there are so many, we are yet to evolve a system on it. So, and when we have to talk about evolving a system over time, which means there has to be a system in place which is constantly working and constantly talking about the unexpected and unwelcoming surprises. Classic example is that when we are doing lake development left, right, and center all over the country, we are not really taking into account that it is harming lake ecosystem more than actually doing good to the lake. But because society appreciates it, because they are not informed about it, they are not aware of the lake ecosystem, this is where over time, these lakes will no more remain lakes as ecosystems, because the governance itself will change the value. And society will be at loss, or ecosystem will be at loss. Another classic example here is the number of lakes which have diminished. As I mentioned, over the years, many lakes which are lost is a change in the landform. But then linking it with the flooding system, which a problem which we are having in the country now, in every urban city or town, we are unable to link that change. That because we lost the lakes, it is attributing to more flooding in the city. So this change, should we address the lake or should we address the flooding, and how does governance address that? Another classic example is that the groundwater depletion is also attributed to the nature of change of lakes in the cities or in any habitat or small towns. So a classic example, and to add to here, our ironic example is that we have seen many places in the country where they are drawing groundwater to fill the lakes. I think that's a disaster. It should not be done. So how does governance address this kind of misinformation or misdeeds? And because there is not much information stored or put properly, which can register, document, and disseminate the changes in the water system. So that brings me to a very important failure of governance, that is governance of problem. How does governance define the problem? When there is a project taken, let's say a lake development project or any other project, but because in this book we focus on the lake development, how is the problem defined? Is a problem itself in governance? Because if the problem is identified rightly, half the job is done. But if the problem is not identified or rightly, then actually we increase the problem in future, which is what we are doing with the lake development, for example. So there is always this situation in governance that this is a state A or an existing state, and in governance, because we have to reach somewhere, because governance is always outcome oriented, there is a desirable state. So if you see all kinds of lake development projects, you will see beautiful drawings with pathway and lighting and seats and edges with the stones and concrete. You never see or you never read in the document that they talk about ecosystem rejuvenation, or they talk about they will bring back the local fish, they will bring back the local flora, or there will be these birds will be really targeted so that the lake is flocked with the birds and all. So, this desirable state is actually something which is aspired by the society, which is where we can link it with the value. How does society value water systems or a lake in this case? So the common failure is the problem identification itself, that what is a desirable state and what is the existing state. So if the existing state problem is not identified properly, the desirable state, which is the outcome, is already a wrong outcome. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that identifying the lake for development where we consider that the lake is polluted, and that is the problem itself, is a wrong problem identification. The right problem is that why this lake is getting polluted, who is polluting the lake, because lake pollution is the effect, not the cause. So identifying the cause of the problem will be always the right problem. But unfortunately, we identify effect of the problem as a problem, and then we try to address it. So if we address lake pollution as our problem, we end up actually treating the water or the lake, and we develop the lake, we close the lake from all sides. This will not happen, that will not happen, we will not allow this to come into the lake, and so we actually choke the lake in that way. So because the problem is identified in a very shallow manner, because it's already a cause effect, not the cause, there is always also a tendency in governance to look for quick solutions, because it is time bound, because the funds are time bound, because officers are time bound, because the problem itself is half misinformed or half informed problem. So the solution looks very easy. This lake is polluted, chalo, we clean it today. Next year again there will be polluted, we will clean it again. So so it's like a cure approach than a prevention approach. So identifying problem itself is a governance of problem, and that's why we face this kind of challenges of governance failures. And that brings me to the last argument which I'm placing today here, which is governance of sustainability. So because governance is more focused on good governance leading towards sustainable lakes or sustainability of the water bodies or water resources in this concern, ironically, in the last many years, because governance is a complex system, the whole idea of sustainability has moved beyond ecological sustainability. So the word sustainability emerged as ecological sustainability, whereas today when we talk about sustainability, we have many more sustainabilities which are to be achieved. For example, social sustainability, economic sustainability, political sustainability, cultural sustainability, and their importance in local, national, international, all kinds of arenas. So what happens in attaining those sustainabilities, which are social sustainabilities, by the way, the ecological sustainability of the resource is undermined, or it becomes a lesser preference. And the social sustainability part, or the political economic, which I'm putting them as one club, becomes more important. And when after achieving or after addressing all those sustainability, if at all there is an interest or intent to address the ecological sustainability, there still lies a problem with the governance of sustainability. What is to be sustained in a lake, for example, or in a resource? Why to sustain? For whom? Because if I am not facing water problem today, why should I be concerned? And that applies to most of the urban lakes in the country, by the way. Because then it is done half-heartedly. Okay, today it is polluted, I am in this position, let me just do it and finish my work, tick mark laga diya, and kaam khatam ho gaya. How much to sustain? Because if we have lost half the lakes, should we sustain whatever is remaining? Because we have lost the water quality, because we have lost the soil quality, should we sustain what is remaining now? Or should we really rejuvenate the original form? This is a huge question which governance always faces. How long to sustain? Should I sustain till my job? Should I sustain for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, or till eternity, which is the bequest value of a resource or a water body in this case? So what state to sustain, as I already mentioned? What is today, which is the existing state, or what is desired from it? Because most of the urban lakes, when they are going through lake development, are turning into tanks, water tank, swimming pool, where people are expecting clean water like swimming pool, which is not possible because wastewater is coming into most of the lakes in the country. So unfortunately, there is more fund in talking about the social sustainability, which I was speaking in the previous slide, as governance of problem and governance of sustainability here. There is lesser funds actually to maintain the ecosystem of the lake, or lakes sustainability for that matter. So even if it is worked on, it is very, very short period, short time, and very limited work done. And also the challenge of governance of sustainability is because we are dealing with a complex system where it is an engineered system from which we expect an ecosystem value, which is already skewed, we end up in a 2x2 model of governance of sustainability. We may do really good work as governance, we can still not get a good result. We may do, very low governance, and we may still get a good result or good lake, which is what I usually advocate, that if you want to manage a lake, please leave the lake aside, but do not damage the lake. So no governance or low governance, even to large extent in a context, can be a very beneficial thing. But we have to still look at a situation where you do a lot of work, you don't get gains in the lake side. Where you do no work, you get high gains. And there are most of the situations in the country at present is poor governance or low governance and poor lake situation and low or deteriorated lake. Now there is a utopian situation also. You do very good governance and you get a very good lake situation or a water situation. Now these are 2x2 matrix of good governance or governance and a resource sustainability. Whereas when we study governance literature, we always find that there is a normative notion that good governance will lead to good sustainability or to sustainable lakes in this example. And that is a myth that needs to be clarified, that there are many factors which needs to be understood, and this kind of situation arises in most of the lake situation. Personally, I would prefer the utopian idea of good governance and good lake condition. But I mean, if I go more towards eco-theology, I will prefer more no governance and actually better lake conditions. But do not damage it. If you don't manage it, just don't damage it. Then it will be natural rejuvenation. So that brings me towards the end of understanding of writing this book together. That it is important to look into these isolated models, theories, and arguments, because they may be, most of them may be portraying a pessimistic picture because the book was written for governance failure, but they still remain very crucial to understand how governance functions, how governance processes occur, how outcomes are perceived, what are the preferred value by the society, how we are unable to capture the change in the value and all. And just attributing it to only community is not managing, government is not managing, should be privatized, may not be enough. So if you look all these theories in together, you get a more holistic picture of community behavior to a certain extent. And that was one of our major learning in compiling them together, because as I mentioned, during 5 years of PhD, I came across all of these things and I could not use it in my PhD time because I was working on a different format. But then bringing them together helped me really understand the fact that most of these models, theories, and arguments, on one hand, can be understood to understand failure of the governance, but at the same time, they are the only ones where we can actually avert the failure and work towards good resource or good governance. So even if I had written or we had written this book in terms of how to achieve good governance, the same theories and models can be studied in a different manner. I wish I had done that if urban lakes in India were in good condition. But because they are not in good condition, I was more inclined or concerned to write why we are failing in managing them to understand it better. And I think another important thing which was a major learning for us was this emerging complexity theories, because these were very isolated, small case examples of where theories were built over the time. But when we look at complexity, we actually get into this domain of social ecological system framework. We get into human nature framework. We get into many other frameworks which are developed now: integrated lake basin management, integrated water resource management, where many aspects are looked together. So these are old old established theories and models, but still they have some value. And primarily, this literature was developed more as a simple tool for master students, MPhil students, bachelor students to understand microeconomic behavior of the society, of the community towards resource management or governance. So it's really the intended target of the book was very clear. because when toddlers of science or early research scholars or science scholars are entering this domain of water governance, how will they come across these theories and models, and how can they be taught in a very crisp and concise way? And that was the purpose. Now, if one is interested to read or understand each one of these theories and models, as I mentioned, they are themselves a book by their merits, which was not intended here. They can always get into each one of them. But the idea is to introduce it. Can be an introduction. So if I had an opportunity to change the title of the book, I will say Introduction to the Theories and Models and Framework. So it also helped to bring this compilation in a cumulative way. But if you want to study governance of a resource, you can also use these models to understand in a comparative way as well. So as I mentioned, I'm extensively using it for textbook as water resource governance literature. And I'm also motivated after writing this mini book because it has been also referred widely and also translated into other language. I'm now coming up with a follow-up mini book manuscript on do's and don'ts of urban lake governance. So this was kind of learning for me, as well as take things forward from the book which is there. So I will stop here. Thank you so much for listening, and I will be open for questions. Okay, if there are questions for me, I can take them if you have any questions, how to make use of these theories and models. Anyone?
Hi, I have a question, Mansee. Anuja here.
Hi, Anuja.
This was very insightful, and I was just trying to connect this. This was based for urban lakes, but can this also be used for urban rivers, which are equally suffering?
Very good question. Actually, this can be used for any common pool or shared resource in the society. It can be used for urban rivers, of course. It can be used for knowledge commons. It can be used for malnutrition, women and empowerment. Anything which is education, infrastructure, drainage, anything which is shared by the society, all the theories are applicable. So the book is intended to how to understand that these are established theories, and then you can apply. So you may not apply all of them, but all of them are applicable to most of the resource failures.
Yeah.
So you can study any resource from it using the theory. I used urban lake as an example. So the study is not on urban lakes. I used only as an example how to understand these theories and models.
Okay. So if like someone who's not well versed with the research part and needs practical training, how do we get a session on that? How to basically get that practical knowledge of applying it?
See, if you are on ground and practicing, you may not require the theories, first of all, because this is a scientific work. But if you understand the theories, it is always useful for you to understand the society better. See, how theories are built is, they are built through models. How models are built is, there are many case studies which are collected from all over the world, all over space and time. And they are brought together, and the pattern is seen that, okay, this is repeated time and again, repeated time, and then theories are built. So that way, if you understand a theory, or if you read a theory, you have a better understanding to understand the society, and you are not really getting bogged by to understand why people are behaving in this way. In fact, that was the very purpose why I wanted to write it, is that after my PhD, after traveling all over the country and looking at the lakes and seeing the same pattern everywhere, whether it is governance or the lake, there was this constant struggle in the mind that why are people not doing right things? Why are we doing constantly wrong things? So then this kind of understanding this theory as theories and models at least gave me peace of mind to understand the society better. I may not have changed the society, but I can understand the society better. I'm not afraid, I'm not struggling to get answer why we are in a wrong path. So at least I could answer myself. So, it's like be the change you want to see in the world. It's just like that, At least I know what I should not be doing after this,
Yeah.
So because of this understanding of the theories and models, that this is how society has been performing over the time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions? Because I have my students as a master class, so I would like to take their questions. And I keep reminding them that asking question is a fundamental duty of citizens of India. Or maybe you will digest this and then ask me questions. Any questions from anyone? Okay. I don't see any hand raised or any questions. So let me just thank you all for joining us today and really helping me share my thoughts in this masterclass kind of session. And I will just make the final announcement for the next coming sessions before I do the final vote of thanks to all of you. So please join us for next Friday session on Thesis Club on November 18th at 5 p.m. And we are discussing the sanitation planning challenge in Kerala, the case of Alappuzha with Paresh Chhajed. So he's a PhD scholar. Then we also have next Wednesdays for Water, where we have a very interesting topic, which is on November 16th, again at 5 p.m. What is really water scarcity? And we are going to see it from Western perspective. So we have a professor from Leiden University, and he's going to talk from Netherlands. And we have a very well researched, grounded, and researcher activist from Hyderabad. So we will get the Western and Oriental perspective of how water scarcity is perceived, and that's on November 16th. So thanks again, all of you. Please do keep looking at our website, www.w4w.in for more information. But for now, please take care of yourself. Bye and thank you.